Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rich Vreeland. I am the pastor of spiritual formation and education here at Missiongathering, and I am certainly glad that you all are here. So this morning we continue our series on doubt, and today's topic is, what if I'm not good enough? So before we start, one thing that helps me a little bit is to get quiet, so if you wouldn't mind and get quiet with me. And you can close your eyes or keep them open. But let's just sit and breathe together for a moment. And in the silence, just feel the presence of the Spirit. Thank you, God. All right. So what if I'm not good enough? Well, when I write a sermon, what generally happens is I begin the week kind of considering the topic, reading, just looking for information or things that are happening in the world or my own life that relate to the topic. And so this week's topic really couldn't have been more appropriate for me. Because this is, in many ways, how I've been feeling lately. I have struggled with this idea of what if I'm not good enough? And what if I'm not good enough to be here in front of you? And this feeling was highlighted for me in a Facebook post and comment. Pastor Andrew shared the Facebook event for today, and there was 2 comments on that, and the one that hit me was from Thomas, and I won't say his last name, Marlowe. Sorry. And Thomas commented, "The guy preaching is the one who thinks he isn't good enough at prayer." And then parenthetically, even though he's excellent at it. But the first part of that is such a true statement for me, and it's not even so much about prayer as it is almost everything. But that idea of not being good enough at prayer, that was something that I admitted here in front of you all a couple of weeks ago. But there's really this deeper truth about that, about how I feel. But before we get into all of that, I want to read a scripture that we're going to be referring to today. And we'll be reading from Exodus chapter 3, verses 11 through 14. And before we get into it, though, I want to give you a little bit of background, because we're picking up the story in the middle of Moses' burning bush experience. And so the events leading up to that go something like this. Moses sees his people being mistreated by this Egyptian overseer of labor, and he ends up killing the Egyptian. And so he flees Pharaoh. He ends up in Midian. He meets the priest there. The priest gives Moses his daughter Zipporah as a wife. They get married. And then later on, the Pharaoh dies, and the new king of Egypt is harder on the slaves than even his predecessor was. And so God takes notice of the suffering of the Hebrews, and remembering his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he appears to Moses in this burning bush. Now, if you recall, the covenant with Abraham was a promise that Abraham would father a multitude of nations. It was a promise that that multitude of nations would be provided a homeland. And so, in light of the covenant that God made, in light of his own promise and keeping his promise in mind, God instructs Moses to go to Pharaoh and to speak to him and to secure freedom of the Israelites, to lead them out of Egypt. And so this is where we join the story. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. This is the word of God for the people of God. So who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Moses is filled with doubt about his abilities. He's faced with this demand from God, this instruction, and he's uncertain as to whether or not he'll be able to succeed. Now, I find this really interesting because up to this point, Moses has led a pretty blessed life, if you think about it. He was placed in a basket as a child. He was set on the river. He was found by the Pharaoh's daughter. He was taken in. He was cared for. Later on in life, he was raised as the Pharaoh's son. And so he had a certain amount of privilege that probably a lot of other people during that time, and especially Hebrews, did not have. And so we also know that Moses, he never really loses his connection to his people. And this is really what has led him to kill that Egyptian overseer. So, adding to this sort of privilege for Moses is that he has fled Egypt. He's found refuge. He's gotten married. He's remained out of sight of the Egyptians, who must at least be a little bit interested in punishing him for the act of murder. And so when we look at Moses' life, we can see that God is with Moses. I mean, that's really the only thing that explains Moses' ability to live this blessed life. So Moses, though, he does not see that, right? Moses, he doesn't see it at all. He doesn't see God working in his life. He has this doubt that he's not good enough to do what God is asking him to do. And while it's really something big that God is asking, right? He's not asking him for a little thing. He's asking him for something, rather substantial. But when God asks, Moses protests. He doesn't see God in his life. He only sees and thinks about what he figures he's able to do. He sees himself as this shepherd, as this fugitive, as someone who's ran from people that raised him and claimed him. Whatever he's thinking, it's not that he is chosen by God to do something special. He has this view of himself that he's not someone who is eloquent. And the way Moses' speech is referred to, we might even think that Moses had a speech impediment. We don't know, but there's something about his speech that he is not comfortable with. And so Moses is thinking, how can someone like me possibly meet God's expectations? And so this conversation that Moses has with God, it continues on, and Moses protests at least 4 times, in spite of God's insistence. Everything Moses says, God comes back. Who am I? God comes back with a response. Who shall I say sent me? What if they don't believe me? I'm not very good on my feet. I'm not a good public speaker. Send someone else. Moses has excuses. He has reasons why he doesn't think he should be the person to do this. But God persisted. Protest after protest, God responds with the reasons why Moses shouldn't have doubt, why Moses should think that, yes, he is good enough. And yet Moses, essentially face to face with God, staring at a burning bush that's talking to him, continues to question and protest, all out of his own doubts and worthiness. So even the voice of God does not convince Moses. The doubts that Moses has about his own ability are so strong and so deep that he fears God's help will not be enough. How many signs will it take? How much grander can they be? He's talking to a burning bush. I mean, that might wake me up. So I want to return to our reading from the book of Faces. The guy preaching is the one who thinks he isn't good enough at prayer. Even though he's excellent at it. It's the book of faces. I tell my students that all the time. Are you on the book of faces? They just think I'm an old man. The other day I brought up MySpace and they had no idea what that was. I felt even older. But, you know, I do appreciate, Thomas, I do appreciate the compliment. I really do. Thank you. But this is my deep fear, right? That I can't possibly be good enough. And it's not only about prayer. Often, when I'm preparing for a sermon or writing a paper or answering discussion questions for seminary, I end up with more questions than answers. I'm regularly filled with doubt. And because of this, I think, how am I the guy that gets to stand up here on Sunday and share the gospel? Like, this can't be right. I have as many questions and doubts as you, and probably more, yet here I am. I protest, God persists. Now, how often do you and I feel this way? How often does doubt come out about whether or not we're good enough for a particular task or a particular situation? We can feel this way about school or work or family. I'm not smart enough. I'm not organized enough. I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not a good enough spouse or partner, right? There's all of these ways that doubt and all of these places that doubt creeps into our lives. We look back on our failures, and our failures, we're continually reminded of them. And since I've failed before, surely I'll fail again. And yet, you go to school, you go to work, you care for your family, because God persists. Now, even when faced with national and international and community problems, right, we can easily feel like there's nothing that we can do, right? This is another place where we get into that doubt of, how can I possibly help? Who am I that I can make a difference? Who will listen to me? Who will believe me or trust me? Who's behind me? But somehow, we show up, we stand up, we speak up, and God persists. God is persistent. Through all of Moses' protests, God persists. God answers all of Moses' concerns. Moses asks, "Who am I?" And God says, "Don't worry, I'm sending you." Moses asks, "Who shall I say sent me?" "Tell them that I am sent you." A little cryptic, but powerful. What if they don't believe me? "Don't worry, I'll give you magic. Throw your staff on the ground, snake. Put your hand into your cloak, leprosy. Put it back in, no leprosy. Throw water on the ground, look, blood, magic." How do you doubt, you know? How do you say, "I'm not good enough"? You're talking to a burning bush, God has given you magic. What else do you need? But here's the best, I think. In Exodus chapter 4, 14 to 17, Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak." But Moses is still not convinced. But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "What of your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he can speak fluently. Even now he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, his heart will be glad. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you what you shall do. He indeed shall speak for you to the people. He shall serve as a mouth for you, and you shall serve as God for him. Take in your hand the staff with which you shall perform the signs." I don't know about you, but God's patience is unbelievable, right? Like, how many times can Moses protest, and how many times does God have to say, "Don't worry, you got this"? If I was God, and believe me, you should be thankful I'm not, but I would have moved on to the next Egyptian-looking Hebrew. Like Moses, you're done. like, who's next? Because this is too much, right? So clearly Moses is not into it, right? He's got some fear, he's got some doubt. But God knows better. God's patient and persistent, and God knows how to use Moses and Aaron. When Moses has given up on himself, God steps in and says, "Don't worry, I got you. And if that's not enough for you, I will send help." But at every turn, every chance Moses gets, he protests. The signs are clear. Burning bush. God is in front of him saying, "I want you to do this, and I know you can do this." But there's so much doubt in Moses. But God doesn't doubt Moses for a minute. There's never a time when God says, "You know, Moses, you might be right. You really aren't very good at public speaking. You're just a fugitive shepherd with no right to be doing my work on earth. I'm moving on." But God doesn't say that. God sees in Moses something that Moses can't see. And who knows Moses better than God? Who's in a better position than God to judge Moses' abilities? But God humors Moses. He listens to his protests, and he offers assurance. He tells Moses that he will arm him with all that he needs, but when even magic isn't enough for Moses, God gives Moses what he needed most. God gives Moses support from another human. God says, "I'll send your brother to help you. I'll teach both of you what you need to do and say, and together you'll carry out my instructions. Together you will bring home the people of Israel." Now, we learn in the following chapter that Moses returns to Egypt to face Pharaoh. So finally. But you may be thinking, like, why? Why is Aaron the answer? Aaron, you are the answer. I'm sorry. I mean, why does sending someone else to help change Moses' mind? Well, it's incredibly easy to feel alone when facing something that feels too much for you. Sometimes you may feel that God can't be bothered, or God just isn't present, or maybe God doesn't care. And so the doubt seeps in. You think, why do I have to do this? Why me? I'm not good enough. We get to thinking that it's all up to us. It's my problem. I have to deal with it. It's my family. It's all up to me. My project. I have to get it done. It's so easy, though, to misjudge our own abilities. I mean, we are our harshest critics. And it's so easy not to see the signs of God working in our lives. But God calls us in a variety of ways, and we are always called into a situation that God has prepared us to handle. Now, this has been difficult for me, for sure. I've questioned my calling a lot, because I get to thinking sometimes this is too much. You know, I'm working a job, I'm going to school, I'm doing stuff here. This week last night, Friday night, I don't even know what day it is. Friday night, I took a test. I answered some discussion questions online. Yesterday, I wrote my sermon. I wrote a funeral service. That was, 12, 15, 16 hours, in 16 hours, there wasn't much more time. And all week long, that's the way my week goes, and so it can become overbearing, it's overwhelming. And so I question, why am I doing this? And when I get into that place, there's always something that pulls me back to keep doing this, just keep doing it. And I don't know. I don't know where it comes from. Well, I do know where it comes from, right? But it's not a voice. It's not a sign. It's just a feeling. It's just the Spirit, I guess, Move forward. Move forward. And the other thing about that is that I've talked to a lot of people over the last several months just about my doubts and what's going on, and people always, always reassure me. I've never had anyone say to me, you know what, you're right. What are you doing? Pastor Andrew never said that. No one has ever said that to me. So, again, no matter how much I resist, no matter how much I protest, the call never leaves. God persists. But I still miss the signs. In fact, I suspect that many of us miss the signs of God working to reassure us. Right? We could get to thinking, well, Moses had a burning bush. Where's my burning bush? At least God offered some help. What does God offer me? I don't have a magic staff. I would love a magic staff. Snake. Like, that would be amazing. I don't like snakes, though. Where's my magic coat? Now, that's cool. I don't know about the leprosy thing, but magic coat is cool. But God has done something greater than offering us a magic staff or a magic coat. God has given us each other. Right? God has provided us with a community that will stand with us, that will speak up for us, that will support us and love us, just as God supports and loves us. God knew that Aaron was just the support, just the community that Moses needed. Once Moses sees that he's not alone, that not only is God with him, but his brother is with him too, then Moses is ready. And that's how it is, or how it should be with us. We are not alone. We have each other. We have family, we have friends, and we have this church community. This community is here to support each and every one of us. And no one knows that better than me. This community is here to lift you up and to lift me up. And it has over and over and over again. That's why you're here. You're here so that you can lift up another, so that you can support the person next to you, the person across the aisle from you, the person behind you. You see, God has given us talents and skills, intelligence, wisdom, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we need someone to touch our arm and say, you got this. You are a wonderful parent. You are a fantastic partner. Sometimes we need someone to stand up with us, to be our voice. That's what community is for, and that's what this community is for. Now, I will probably, more than likely, definitely, continue to be filled with questions and doubts. I will probably continue to feel that God could surely find someone better than me. But I want you to promise me that you will continue to support me, that you will encourage me as you have done all along, and I promise you that I will do the same. But if I'm going to do the same for you, or if anyone in this community is to do this for you, you have to be willing to admit when you feel doubt. You have to be willing to admit when you have questions. You have to be willing to admit when you feel like you are not good enough. The only way this community can support you or stand with you is if we know that you need us to. Being part of this community and reaping the benefits of this community means that we have to be vulnerable to the community. And I promise that when you share your vulnerability, this community will love you, support you, and even equip you with all that you need to move forward. Just as God supported Moses, just as God equipped Moses to overcome his insecurities, this community will do all it can to help you overcome your insecurities. Doubt can be debilitating. It can keep us from doing all kinds of things. But God helps us overcome doubt. Maybe not through a burning bush or a magic staff. Still cool, though. But perhaps God can help us overcome our doubts through the love and the support of community, of this community. When you feel as though you are not up to the task, when you feel as though you're not good enough, trust in God. Rely upon God. And when that seems impossible, trust in community and rely on community. Trust and rely upon the community that God has put in your life. It's in this community, God's community, that you'll find God's love and support. The love and the support necessary to achieve all that you have been called to do. Maybe so.